If you speak nonsense to avoid reality, that's bypassing. Bypassing isn't just spiritual or limited to the spiritual community, even though we hear the term spiritual bypassing the most. Bypassing is just simply using a filter to avoid direct contact with reality, which happens everywhere, all the time. And the spiritual community gets blamed for it because they're one of the easiest to see doing it, and they're also very, very silly people. They're very easy to make fun of, which is true. But other types of bypassing include logic bypassing, corporate bypassing, productivity bypassing, therapy bypassing, wellness bypassing, and so many others. It's just when you use a belief system or a frame to avoid looking at the reality that's in front of you. Over the last few months, I've become absolutely obsessed with the John Deloney Show. It's my favorite podcast by far, and even though I only discovered it in like August, it was my second most listened to podcast of 2025. If you're unfamiliar, it's a call-in show where the above-mentioned host, John Deloney, who has more than 2 decades of experience as a therapist, sits with hurting people and talks them through how to make what he calls the next right move. There's something that he said over and over again that's just really blown me away and helped me think about so many things going on in my own life. And he basically says, if you want to make measurable change in your life, you have to start by choosing reality, which is something that I've verified with a lot of the therapists that I know, that before anyone can make measurable change in their life, they have to live in reality. Otherwise, there's no change that can occur. That's become a motto for me. Choose reality. So what does that mean in practice? Well, let's say hypothetically that heavy drinking has crept up on you over the years. It started when you were in college at fraternity parties, then after college you drank socially, but you always had a few more than your friends on nights out. Over time, you started drinking alone, and then in the present day, you don't feel normal unless you drain a 6-pack of beer or a bottle of wine every night. In that scenario, any story that you tell yourself other than this has become a problem and I need help is a refusal to choose reality. If you tell yourself, I work hard, I deserve it, or any of the myriad other things that addicts say to keep that addiction going, you are bypassing reality. You are refusing to live in reality. And choosing reality in that situation would be accepting that you have a problem and seeking help. Now, obviously, reality is very, very scary. If we have problems and we realize things, like, for example, me realizing that I was dating a certain type of woman and I needed to break that cycle, it's only by choosing reality and facing really hard truths about ourselves that we can build better lives. So why do we only hear the term spiritual bypassing and not just bypassing? We all bypass and refuse to live in reality sometimes. Now, honestly, I think it's because the spiritual community is a very silly place and they are easy to point fingers at and make fun of because they basically beg us to make fun of them. As someone who spent a lot of time around the spiritual community, they're a very easy target. And because they are such ridiculously silly people, they were the group that was first labeled as bypassers. An example of what spiritual bypassing looks like in practice is written down in Psychology Today. The term spiritual bypassing was coined by psychologist John Welwood in the early 1980s. It describes the tendency to use spiritual ideas, practices, or experiences to avoid facing unresolved emotional wounds, psychological shadows, or developmental tasks. Think of it as putting a glossy filter over a cracked foundation. Sure, it looks fine on the surface, but nothing has healed underneath. Spiritual bypassing can look like chasing mystical experiences without integrating past trauma, using substances to transcend the body instead of coming home to it, labeling uncomfortable emotions as low vibe or ego traps to be discarded, and believing one breakthrough trip has permanently healed us. When I was gallivanting through South America and Asia, I spent a lot of time in spiritual communities, and it was so much fun. I did yoga, I sat in ceremonies, I sang in drum circles, I meditated, danced, and loved. It was all amazing for the season of life that I was in. But under the surface, there was always a palpable refusal to face any kind of pain. That was the thing that irritated me about that community. I remember sitting in a circle in Costa Rica after a sound healing ceremony in 2021, and the instructor asking us to share a few words about what we felt while the music was playing. Most people who spoke talked about being animals or flying or meeting ancestors or what other rainbow hippie stuff we wanted to say at the time. Then a woman across from us started sharing. She was from Ukraine, and it had been a few months since the Russian-Ukrainian war had broken out. "I haven't heard from my parents in almost a week," she said as she started sobbing. "The last time I heard from them, they decided to try to get out of the country. I don't even know if they're alive. I should have heard from them by now." There was silence in the room for a moment, and then the instructor bypassed the crap out of this poor lady. She said, "Wow, that's heavy. But it's all for the highest good. The universe never gives us more than we can handle. Everything happens for a reason. You just need to stay in gratitude." And the thing that drove me crazy in that moment is that you could feel the room exhale. This is a bunch of necklace-wearing, long-haired, you know the type. They didn't have to feel her grief or sit with her for the hard thing. The instructor had let them opt out using spirituality. They could all nod like wise owls and move on, and not having to feel the hard thing. Now that did make me furious, and I made sure to check in with her after the class, but I was the only one. We stayed in touch for a few months afterwards, and I found out eventually that her parents did indeed make it out. We all do that sometimes. We all refuse to face the hard thing. We all bypass, no matter what community we belong to. The spiritual community is just one of the easiest places to see bypassing because it's easy to spot. Hippies are a fringe group in society, so when they seek pleasure rather than dealing with problems in their lives, it looks silly. But this refusal to deal with the realities of life is absolutely everywhere. And here's what a few of these bypassing terms sound like in practice. You have spiritual bypassing. Everything happens for a reason. Instead of, "I'm devastated, that's okay. I can sit in grief for a season and feel what needs to be felt without needing to be happy all the time." Or, "I need to sit in ceremony at least once a month to connect with divine energy, and I'm polyamorous." Instead of saying, "I'm a hedonist, I love taking drugs and experimenting with different partners, and I've found a belief system that lets me do that." We also have cognitive bypassing, or what I like to call logic bypassing, which is, when you always say, "Well, if you look at the research," instead of saying, "I might be wrong about this, but here's the stuff I found that backs up the thing I want to be true. I'm terrified of speaking my opinions on this topic because I actually don't know a damn thing about it." And then we have corporate bypassing, which, you say things like, "Why don't we circle back on that in Q1 instead of, 'I don't like you or your ideas, and I sincerely plan on never speaking to you again.'" Or, to holistically operationalize our cross-functional value ecosystem, we need to strategically harmonize stakeholder touchpoints through a scalable, data-informed optimization framework that prioritizes frictionless alignment over legacy silos. Instead of, "I don't know what I'm saying, and neither does anyone who's listening to me. I didn't prepare for this meeting, and I'm hiding behind plain vocab. I should say this in plain English so everyone understands instead of trying to cover my own feelings of inadequacy by sounding smart." So what do we do about bypassing? We're all going to bypass sometimes, and that's okay. Reality's freaking hard to live in. We all vacation in fantasy land whether we want to or not. But if we stay living in those lies and never move past them, we end up driving ourselves insane. The best remedy I've found for being honest with myself is free writing in a journal far away from devices. Just sitting there quietly and writing as much as you can. If there's something you're stuck on or a hard truth you need to face, sitting there silently and writing out, then reading back your own nonsense to yourself is a game changer. Thank you for tuning into The Modern Mythmaker this week. If you enjoyed today's episode, please repost it wherever you found it. Share it with someone. It really helps us grow, and it would mean the world.